The life of a writer isn't always easy. True, it's a fulfilling career path or a rewarding hobby, and for those who achieve success, it's one of the most meaningful careers you can have. Telling stories, imparting wisdom, or entertaining, all through the use of fictional characters and made-up worlds. However, the actual day-to-day life of a writer can be challenging, and not just because of the writing itself. After a writer has planned a story, written it, edited it, and marketed it, there are challenges to face beyond the book itself. In becoming a writer, you must deal with all kinds of unforeseen obstacles, including ones which could put your career, even your life, in jeopardy. Though many writers enjoy their lives and wouldn't have it any other way, just as many find their existences transformed by social media, attacks on their work, theft of their stories, and even regular death threats. In becoming a writer and an author, one must contend with a number of risks, and in this video I outline 5 potential challenges. Not every writer will face every one of these problems, but most writers don't expect to deal with any of them. And as someone who wants to publish someday, I've been forced to face the risks I could take, which I will outline here. Not only for aspiring authors, but for readers who don't always see the struggles writers face behind the scenes. 2023 was the year for review bombs, as a debut author single-handedly destroyed her own career after attempting in her turn to destroy the careers of others. Blaming her mental health for her behavior, the writer in question then lost her contract. But she wasn't the first writer to engage in this behavior, and unfortunately, she likely won't be the last. If it isn't writers trying to undermine those they view as competition, it's readers, either those who discriminate against the writer for some reason or another, or who want to punish the writer, usually for sharing a comment on social media they didn't agree with. The problem has gotten so bad that readers have begun to lose trust in platforms like Goodreads, which have been accused of doing little to mitigate these attacks. For smaller authors who might have no more than a few hundred reviews, these fake ratings can be especially damaging, plummeting what might otherwise be a 4-star read to a 2. As readers rely on reviews in making decisions whether or not to buy, it goes without saying that such a low rating will scare many readers off, in turn killing much of a writer's potential sales. As for the reviews themselves, it's not always obvious that they are fake, especially since any viewer is within their rights to give a low rating. Unfortunately, many negative reviews come from people who haven't read the book at all. People who disagree with someone's political stance or online commentary, for example, have been known to leave 1-star reviews, despite having not engaged directly with the text. A dishonest act, regardless of who was right or wrong in the debate. It's clear that the adage of 2 wrongs don't make a right has been lost, but it doesn't stop there. If there are those leaving reviews on books they haven't read, either because they've heard the book is controversial or because they don't like the writer, there's the even more insidious practice of creating multiple Goodreads accounts, so as to leave dozens, even hundreds of these terrible reviews. With Goodreads doing little to prevent people from creating additional accounts, or to block attackers when they're found, readers and writers alike have grown frustrated with the platform, and with an emerging practice that's unlikely to go away. But if you don't want videos like this one to go away, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps me to have conversations like this one. The second issue authors must contend with is piracy. Piracy has become a complex issue, as there are various factors which go into it. Some people justify piracy by a desire to read a book without supporting an author they disagree with, while others cite a lack of both money and access to libraries. For those living outside of the United States or Canada, books can be prohibitively expensive, and access to libraries non-existent. For those with impairments or disabilities, access, even in developed countries, can be an issue. However, whatever your stance on piracy, which is worthy of its own discussion, the fact remains that authors, particularly those which aren't big names, can suffer from the practice. Moreover, many who practice piracy aren't necessarily those who are disadvantaged or who otherwise couldn't afford the book. While those who are impoverished or disabled might account for some of the piracy, they don't actually make up the majority, and there are enough people who pirate books just because they can. Furthermore, the act of piracy, even if it doesn't harm an author financially, can lead to a writer having their own work taken down. If a pirate steals a book and begins selling it on Amazon, even going so far as to present themselves as the original author, the actual writer can have their book removed and their Amazon account suspended, because the assumption has been made that they are the pirates. This is an especial risk for indie authors, and one Jenna Marisi actually had to deal with. Many writers are also under strict contracts which stipulate that they can't share their work elsewhere. Writers who enter the Kindle Unlimited program do so with the understanding that they won't sell or share their work through other outlets. And pirates posting copies of their book have caused authors to be kicked out of the program. Afterwards, it can be an uphill battle for writers to regain their profile, and even if they do, they lose the sales in the meantime. The third challenge authors face is that of having their book banned. While losing sales from libraries and potential lifelong readers is damaging to the writer, it's most damaging to the readers themselves, as people, especially teens, are losing access to books that not only educate, but which could change their lives for the better. Denied access to well-rounded topics and a variety of viewpoints, youth can grow up ignorant of others, or marginalized if they belong to a group which they aren't seeing represented. Many people have credited books with literally saving their lives, and having books pulled from shelves means that the most vulnerable kids could be left without a lifeline. For authors, it's the loss of an outlet and a lack of opportunity to reach those they need to. Books with LGBTQ characters and themes are especially under fire, though popular reads we take for granted, like The Hunger Games, are also being challenged. This issue is particularly prevalent in the United States, and everyone, from librarians to educators, are being left to deal with the demands of parents on one side and politicians on the other, leaving them little time or freedom to connect their students with the books that matter. Worse, it's obvious that many of the charges books are being laid with are exaggerated at best and false at worst. The true agenda behind the removal of titles is being hidden. When The Hunger Games was banned, one of the alleged complaints was that it pushed religion, even though religion isn't so much as mentioned in the story. I don't even recall a character saying, "Oh my God." But allegations like this point to a more nefarious motive, one which seems to be saying that the book's detractors are against any story where people challenge authority figures like themselves. A dangerous precedent. Special events for intentionally reading banned books have since been created in hopes of combating this before it escalates further. And authors like Stephen King have called on readers to read those books they're being warned away from. Getting into the ugly side of being a writer, writers must face hate comments, and, in the worst case scenario, cancellation if a poorly worded tweet is taken out of context or if assumptions are made about one of their novels. At some point, every writer, and every creator for that matter, will face hate comments. For those who are part of marginalized groups, this problem worsens, with dehumanizing comments becoming an unfortunate norm for such creatives. Many of us have probably heard of the transgender woman who was attacked just for endorsing a beer. If someone can't even drink a beer without being ripped apart, one can only imagine the vitriol marginalized writers face in continually putting themselves and their stories out there to be picked apart. In the most extreme cases, though, writers can be cancelled, and there's some debate over whether or not cancellation is even a thing. Though the reality of cancellation depends both on what your definition of it is and how much of a name you are. If you're the most famous writer in human history, you can't be cancelled, because to be cancelled is to lose your power, your voice, and any sense of your existence. On the other hand, if cancellation means having to deal with concentrated waves of hateful commentary, then I'd argue it exists. Moreover, if cancellation means that you could lose your job because you agreed with the wrong person, then that is a very real threat. One writer had to make ends meet as a truck driver after her publishers fired her over one comment they disagreed with, dismissing in a moment the decades of work she'd done for them. The worst part of cancellation for writers, though, isn't even the financial hit. It's the sustained attack on one's mental health, which ultimately leads to creators withdrawing. Not because they were fired or lost sales, but because the abuse had escalated to a point where they felt unsafe, and even worried for the safety of their families. For writers who are blacklisted, there's more than contracts at stake, though financial loss can sting in its own right, especially if you're not as big of a name. Writers can not only receive death threats and hateful comments, but some have had their addresses leaked, with intentions which can only be harmful not only to them, but to the loved ones they live with. Some writers who are doxxed have children, who could be endangered if the wrong person decides to act on the information which has been shared. This isn't to say writers shouldn't be held accountable if they do something wrong, but in many cases, at least in my opinion, what the writer said and what people say they said are often two different things. In many cases, I don't think some writers who have been attacked did do anything wrong, though what they said was taken out of context and regurgitated by others with their own interpretation. Furthermore, even in cases where writers have made mistakes, these errors are blown out of proportion, with writers who made one ignorant comment being labeled as raging racist. Writers are being equated with people like Donald Trump because they wrote a poorly researched character in a novel 10 years ago. We know that punching someone is wrong, but we would never give someone the death penalty for punching someone, and that's what's happening. For making a mistake, many authors are facing consequences which outweigh the crime, if there was a crime to begin with. Something many won't even be able to agree on, because what's problematic can be so subjective. Writers should be able to learn from their mistakes and grow. We're all human, and no one is perfect, and this expectation that every writer should be a flawless paragon is extremely toxic. By all means, we should practice sensitivity and be mindful of what we say, but we should also be given some grace when we screw up. and not have to fear for our lives simply because we said the wrong thing. I know there will be things in the books I write that people won't like, but unless something I write is inaccurate to real life and that it gives misinformation, I'm not going to shy away from telling the story I want to tell. I already know my book won't be perfect, no matter how much I do and how much input I receive from others. But I'm bracing myself, nevertheless, for a time when I will have to look over my shoulder. If my books find any kind of success, I may even have to shut down this channel or disable comments, simply for the response certain aspects of the story are going to cause. I may even have to move, which brings me to my next point. The threat of cancellation pales in comparison to that of the death threats writers can face, though cancellation can be a facilitator of such activities. While most death threats come to nothing, as evidenced by the fact most major writers and celebrities are still alive, they must always be taken seriously, because on occasion, attackers get through. All creative people with some level of fame face this threat, and we've had our share of tragedies, including what happened to John Lennon. Death threats are very real. To return to the world of writers, though, we have witnessed in the past few years an actual assassination attempt. Salman Rushdie barely escaped with his life after being assaulted at a speaking event, and he has sustained permanent blindness in one eye, to say nothing of the other injuries he's had to heal from, or the hit his mental health has taken. It was a near thing, and in Rushdie's case, the death threats don't just come from disenchanted readers. They come from literal agencies who view his work as dangerous. I hope most writers never face this most extreme of risks. However, as a creative, it's something I've thought about, and I won't pretend that I could ever prepare myself for any kind of death threat. The idea of receiving a death threat is surreal to me, but it's something some writers face every day, sometimes with grave consequences. In all likelihood, I'll probably never be famous enough to receive that kind of attention, let alone that level of hate. And in making this video, I don't want to scare anyone. For every Rushdie, there are thousands of writers who lead safe and fulfilling lives. In bringing up these challenges, I mainly wanted to raise awareness, particularly for readers, around the shit writers have to deal with. I love writing, and nothing compares to the joy I have when I create characters and tell stories. It's a beautiful job, and I admire anyone who has it, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Writing is hard, and that should be acknowledged. Writers have to figure out so much, including how to write the books themselves and then sell them, and social media can complicate that. In navigating online spaces, especially those like BookTube or BookTok, writers can feel like they're in over their head. In finding guides they can trust, writers may even trust the wrong person or accept erroneous advice. AuthorTube itself can be a danger, which I discuss in the video on the left. Thank you for watching, and happy writing!